took the newspapers out onto the balcony at the back of the apartment as I didn't want to be overlooked. She'd bought stacks of the Citizen. It was about tabloid size, printed on rough, cheap paper. I sat in the warm sunshine with my back to the wall of the apartment, and gradually, over the next half hour or so, the pile of papers on the right became a heap of paper tubes on my left, as I took each copy, rolled it along its length, and wrapped some tape around it to keep it in shape. Then I put a blanket in the bottom of a bin bag and packed it with a stack of the rolled up papers. Repeating the process, I managed to get 4 full bags. I put most of the rest of the blankets to soak in a bucket full of cooking oil. The day seemed to pass slowly. It seemed an age before darkness fell, as it always did around 6. Then I had about another 2 hours to wait until the disco at the back started up. But now I could finish my preparations. I picked up the jerry can. The awkward weight felt heavy but familiar in my hands, as with a clank I opened it. As I tipped the sloshing can into the first open bin bag, the oily reek of diesel perfumed the night air. The can shuddered and rocked in my hands as the oil poured with a soft gulping sound, soaking into the papers and the blanket. Once each bag had been doused, another blanket went on top, again to be soused in fuel, and I knotted them closed. Carefully, I shut the can with a snap and left it out on the balcony as I went in to wash my hands. I didn't want any accidents here, after all. When I'd first moved into the apartments, immediately outside at the front of the block, but before the roadside shanty dookahs and bars, there was a slowly spreading waste ground strewn with blackened piles of old bags, cans and bottles. This was the dump, where all the apartment's houseworkers simply piled up the trash, and where, once the heap was big enough, one or other of them would set fire to it. Until one day, a lorry full of workers and breeze blocks arrived, and at the end of 3 days, there was the pen. It was a simple construction, about 2 metres square. 3 of the walls were about 2 metres tall, while the 4th, facing towards the flats, was half that. Gaps had been left between the breeze blocks at the bottom to let in air, so it made for a relatively efficient incinerator. Now, instead of just dumping garbage at random, the houseboys and maids from all the apartments dumped it in the pen, which at least contained it all in one place until it was full enough to burn. Carrying the first 2 bags down, I heaved them over the low wall and onto the stinking heap of tied-up plastic shopping bags full of papers, vegetable refuse, potato peelings, scraps and all sorts of other rubbish that had been accumulating in the pen over the last few days, together with some brushwood that had been cut from around the entrance to the car park and dumped in early in the week. I was pleased to see it was so full. As I added the second pair of bags a few minutes later, I looked around carefully. There didn't seem to be anyone around. I was quite casual about it. Undoubtedly, many of the locals would know I was going. The houseboys would all gossip together with the Ascaris every day. People around the apartments would be expecting to see rubbish being dumped as I cleared out, although they probably wouldn't expect to see me doing it, obviously. I could hear the soft hubbub of voices from the bars outside at the front of the flats, but they were another 10 or so metres down the road from the pen. In daylight, the front of the structure was clearly visible from the flat. In the dark and in the shadow of the pen itself, I doubted that anyone could see me, even if they were looking. Then there were my friends the Ascaris, but they all dossed out on the concrete steps in front of the cars at the far end of the park, that led to the path round the back to the furthest block of apartments. I'd be unlucky if there was anyone watching. No, it looked safe enough, or as safe as I could hope for at least. Now it was a matter of waiting. As I sat there, just after 8, I heard the girls' voices coming down from above. A little bubble of brightness and jollity disappearing down the stairwell. Then the rusty creak as the ground floor door grating opened, followed by the grinding, complaining squeal as it was pulled to again, and the gel-like clank of the moment the grating crashed shut with a reverberating clang that seemed to go on forever. It was like the doors of hell closing. Well, I thought, time to go to work. With the girls now out from the apartment above and the apartment below empty, that only left the family on the ground floor, but they probably wouldn't matter too much. The shower room's window faced out onto the back of the block, so it was away from those on either side, which would be making their own noise anyway. At the back there was the short stretch of ground, with the water tank, which then gave over onto the road, on the other side of which was a big empty building plot and a large walled house, which at the moment looked unoccupied. The disco seemed to be a couple of 100 metres further down on the right. It was shielded from view by trees, but I'd hear it clearly when it started to get going. Most of the relevant bits of shopping were on the table. Standing in the darkened living room, I pressed the play button on the dusty black ghetto blaster before turning back into the room and reaching out for the clothes. As if in a dream, I pulled the boiler suit on over my boxers and stuffed its legs into the top of the Wellington boots. As the staccato guitar gave way to the crashing beat of the drums and the strangely echoing melody, I felt at home. I'd have been afraid of drawing attention, of having some neighbours come round to complain about the noise. But here, it was normal. Mind you, at home I wouldn't be in this situation. I felt strangely disassociated from the present, almost as though I was watching myself from afar. I felt nauseous, and then a violent hot churning need to run back towards the Cho. You're stalling, I thought to myself, slipping the elastic strap to the protective face mark over my head. You're finding all sorts of excuses, the voice in my head went on. You've just got to get on and do it. With an unbearable effort, I took a first reluctant step towards the hallway, and then a second. All of a sudden, there I was, dust mask and goggles in place outside the door, as the familiar haunting voice growled its instructions. I reached across to the unit on the shelf to turn up the volume. I fitted the bar into the latch on the shower room door and it opened as the song crescendoed. The shower room was dark. I hadn't bothered to turn on the light. There was a sort of grunt and a movement as I pushed the door open. He must have heard me come in. And for reasons I could never really explain, I said, "I'm sorry about this."